When I learned about Navalny's death, I felt shocked, frustrated, and extremely sad. Many people considered his death as a personal loss, as if he was someone from their family. So did I. I met my friend. We went to lay flowers. Now I feel like we lost the only hope for changes, for better life and our future. And I guess that is exactly what Putin wants us to do, to keep being scared of his regime, stop struggling and fighting, and give up. For the moment, we have to try to get through it, these emotions, and take our time. As for Yulia Navalny, I believe she could continue Alexei's activity, not replace, of course, no one could replace him. I personally would be really happy to see such a woman in Russian future politics. I don't know, we'll see. Time will tell.
You've just heard a resident of Moscow speaking to us after the death of Alexei Navalny, the most prominent leader of Russia's opposition, who died in an Arctic prison on February the 16th. In this episode of Russia on the Record, a week on from when Navalny's death sent shockwaves around the world, we're going to look at what the loss of the anti-corruption campaigner and political activist means for Russia's people and the anti-Putin opposition. Since his death, people across Russia have left flowers in Navalny's memory near the monuments to victims of other political repressions from Russia's history. Many of these new memorials were erected under the watchful eyes of Russia's police, who have arrested several hundred people who went to honour a man they saw as a hero. But many people continue to bring flowers, no matter what. This is what one Moscow resident told us.
I went to lay flowers for 3 days in a row. It helped a lot. Action is better than inaction. And it was nice to see so many sympathetic, like-minded people. But I was upset that there were so few of them. Many of my friends didn't come because they were afraid, even though they also cried and were very sad. I saw some people from the police taking pictures of me and other people, but I don't care anymore. I was ashamed of my reaction, that I was crying over the death of a man I didn't know, a politician. But seeing how many people were feeling the same, like they lost their relative, that it was some kind of collective trauma and grief, I realized that I was normal. It's normal to emphasize. It's not normal to kill. Now I have accepted his death and feel better. He lived freely and he died freely. He had an interesting life. He was happy with his family, and Russia will always remember him. He's a legend. For me, he is alive. His spirit is with us. He's brave, courageous, fearless, strong, unbreakable, free, always laughing.
It's still unclear what exactly caused Navalny's death, where his body is, and when it will be given to his family for burial. Navalny's mother, who travelled to the town of Kharkiv this week, even appealed directly to President Vladimir Putin to give her son's body to the family. Though she has long resisted calls to step into politics, Navalny's wife, Yulia Navalnaya, who lives in exile, announced that she would continue her husband's cause. Alexei Navalny left behind him a wide network of employees who worked at his headquarters and at the Anti-Corruption Foundation, who produce high-profile investigations into Russia's corrupt elite. Both organizations have been declared extremist in Russia, meaning its members and supporters face lengthy prison sentences. Many of Navalny's supporters have left Russia even before the invasion of Ukraine, and some have stayed in the country despite the risk of arrest. We asked one of Navalny's former supporters, Olga, who still lives in Russia, if she believes that Navalny's work will continue after his death.
Of course, his work will be continued in any case. I supported Alexei for many years, despite the enormous pressure that was put on me, including 2 raids, detention, and 18 cases the police brought against me. But despite all this, I did not stop, and I continued to support him as much as I could. And so all those people who want change, like me, I'm sure that they will not stop either, because there's no other way. And every one of those people, They're educated. They know what they want. They're not afraid of the police or the courts. So yes, I think all of this will continue, and more people are getting angry. And I think this will eventually lead to change. I think everyone, whether they're in Russia or abroad, who's doing something, all their efforts are going to add up. There are people who, like me, aren't leaving despite everything. I mean, we understand and we expect to be arrested any day. I live every day knowing that they can come for me any day. Just like Lilia Chanisheva, Navalny's regional coordinator in Bashkortostan, was arrested. But I'm not leaving. And those who have left, I think they too are still waiting for changes in Russia and will do whatever they can. The fact that Yulia Navalnaya announced that she will continue Alexei's work, of course, I have great respect for her. Yes, I think that's what is important right now. The fact that people are not giving up, nor is she.
To learn more about what Navalny meant for Russian society and Russian political life, we spoke to Russian journalist and presenter at TV Rain, Mikhail Fishman, who once edited the Moscow Times. He knew Navalny personally, reported on his work, interviewed him, and exchanged letters with him when he was in prison. What was it that made Alexei Navalny such a unique figure in Russian politics?
We all know Navalny's personality, who he was, and of course, his personality defined his place in Russia's history, and we know what we're talking about. It's his courage, his resolve, his honesty, and of course, his sense of humor, his resilience and his will. That's what made him special. He is a hero, and he was hero before he died, and he died as a hero. And that's, of course, makes him the unique political leader across Russian history. But that's not the only thing which makes him special. What is important about Navalny and his political career and his political life, and what made him the leader of Russian opposition, is that he was an inventor. He invented new way of doing politics in Russia, doing oppositional politics. He invented very many things, actually, how to do that. First, he learned to and started relying on people in his political work. He basically invented political crowdfunding in mid-late 2000s when he started his first, what would later become the Anti-Corruption Foundation. That was his blog in his social network and live journal back then, but it already relied on just average people crowdsourcing and crowdfunding his work and his team. I remember I interviewed him for my book a few years ago, and he said to me, it was a common thing across Russian opposition, what to do if something happens, to release a statement. That's how an oppositional leader would behave. I decided I will have a job, and I will go to work, and I will have a team. And that's what he was. So that's very important. He invented how to expose corruption. He started with buying shares of state companies, like many journalists actually did. But instead of writing articles, he would expose, then attend shareholders' conferences, receive papers and materials and information, and expose it. Not just write an article, but call a press conference, make a video, which was the other thing that he invented, which was that he invented how to reach out with these investigations of Russian corruption to larger audiences. Because who would care to read an article in a professional financial newspaper about stocks, about tenders, about shares, about contracts and stuff? Nobody will. He learned how to expose it in a way that would attract large audiences, specifically across younger generations. That's how he actually built his base as a political leader, relying on his investigations, first in his blog, then through videos, in a smart, but also interesting and funny, ironic, sarcastic way, attractive to large audiences, to people. And that's how he built his base. But that's, again, not all what he did. He was, and that's what I think made him specifically very special. That's what makes him different from everyone. He is the only Russian oppositioner, Russian political leader, who defeated Putin more than once within Putin's rules of the game. and I mean elections. He invented how to defeat Putin and his regime and his system at the election, which provides no choice. But still, since there is an election to which real opposition is never allowed, that's how Putin's election basically works. Still, since there is an election, there is a desirable winner for the authorities, for the Kremlin, for the power, for Putin. So there is a way to harm the system. He came out with later would become a brand, so-called smart voting, which is a tactical voting. There is always a desirable candidate or party or entity, something that which somebody is supposed to win. So if large crowds engage in supporting tactically its formal opponent, who they wouldn't ever vote for, but it makes sense just to defeat the supposed winner, then, and if it happens on a scale, not as a singular event, but as a system, systematically, then it works. And he first started it in 2011 during the parliamentary election in December 2011, where he asked to vote for, that was his formula, against the party of crooks and thieves, which were, he meant, United Russia. So basically, do not abstain from voting, do not boycott the election, go and vote for this technical formal opposition. There are still Putin's parties, but if United Russia doesn't have a majority in the parliament, that's a crisis for the Kremlin. And that's what happened. Please do not get me wrong. It didn't happen only because Navalny called to this kind of action, but he understood what was the real trend and what was going on with this particular election. And his call also added to the final outcome, in which in 2011, United Russia lost the election. And therefore, the Kremlin and Putin had to rig the outcome of the vote and to secure the majority in the parliament. When this rigging became so vivid and visible for everyone, that's when and why Bolotnaya movement started in December 2011. So that was the first time when he actually defeated Putin. Well, again, it was a major trend for United Russia to lose, but he added to this trend. Then there was an election, a Moscow mayor election in 2013, which he almost made it to the second round. He probably did, and probably the outcome was again rigged to secure that he didn't. But nevertheless, it was his campaign, and he received 27%, something like that. But he was supposed to receive 6%, to get 6%. He got 27. That was a moral triumph of huge scale, and of course a moral defeat of Putin and his candidate, Moscow Mayor Sobyanin. But names do not matter. What matters is that he defeated the system again. And then already under this brand name of smart voting, he helped independent candidates to largely defeat the Kremlin during the election of Moscow parliament in 2019, when a big faction of independent parliamentaries actually entered Moscow parliament. And I truly, after having learned what happened and the consequence of events, I'm positive that that's what made Putin believe and the Kremlin believe that he is dangerous politically. And that's why the decision to take his life was made in 2020 when he was first poisoned with Novichok in his hotel, in the hotel in Tomsk. I believe this was the reason. I truly do. And even after he returned back to Russia from Berlin after waking up from the coma after he was poisoned, and he was already in jail, this smart vote system was still working. And it worked very efficiently during the parliamentary election in 2021, in which again, the Kremlin had to rig the outcome of the vote so that no independent candidate in Moscow would enter the parliament. Otherwise, they certainly would. It would be a big faction of independent parliamentaries in Russian Duma in 2021 when Navalny was already in jail. So that is, I think, what makes Navalny so special, that he was the only Russian oppositional leader who actually learned how to defeat Putin and his system. But that again is not all. That we knew already, even before he was jailed, that he is very efficient in that. But what I personally learned probably after, at least on this scale, that I learned that how important it is. It's that we always assume there is an assumption about Navalny that he has no ideology. You never can really say, is he a liberal or is he a nationalist? There was always this debate about that he should come out and speak about himself, who he really is, because who is Mr. Navalny, etc., etc. And there is, of course, some truth behind that. And he's not a true liberal in a way we learned what liberal would be, Russian liberal would look like and would behave and politically behave, what we learned about it in the 90s. He's certainly different from that. But it doesn't mean that he had not ideas. He had one, at least one, which made him very special. He had this idea that he is not alone. And that is a very strong message and strong concept, that he is part of a great number of people, of actually majority of Russians. And this majority, although it's not that visible, still is the majority of Russian nation who want to live peacefully and happily and lead their honest lives. And there is a bunch of crooks who actually took power. But it's not them who enjoy this support of the majority. It's him. It's not only him. He's just part of this extremely large national movement. We are a great force. For example, in this now specifically famous passage from the film, remember, we are very strong force. That's what he's saying. And that's his constant idea, that he represents basically the great majority of Russian nation. And that makes him very different from other democratic political leaders in Russia. Basically, almost everyone. They usually took their power and authority from above. But Navalny took his authority and his power as a leader from below. Boris Yeltsin was the member of Politburo. He appointed Boris Nemtsov as a governor. That's how basically Nemtsov started his political career. Actually, Boris Nemtsov made a big way in terms of creating this on a local level in Nizhny Novgorod, where he was the governor, to build his base across average like Russians. But still, he sort of failed in that, because then he moved to Moscow, then he again started to rely on the Kremlin and so on. And the liberal faction in Russian parliament, liberal forces in Russian politics, always thought of themselves as representing some very caring, very aspiring for better, happy life for everyone, but still minority of Russian people. Navalny is very different. He always thought and always was absolutely sure, that's what made him so strong, that he represents everyone, the great majority of Russian nation. And that, I think, is this major idea which made him who he was, finally, and played its role in what he became and his place in Russia's way.
Even before he died, many people said that Navalny's return to Russia in 2021 was the wrong decision. Do you agree?
For me, I wouldn't even really think about that, because technically it was probably wrong, because he was jailed and then murdered in jail. But I don't see that Navalny had any other choice. I don't think that he ever thought that he has any choice. Actually, like a month ago, there was an anniversary of his return back home from Berlin to Moscow when he was arrested at the airport. And he talks about that in his social networks. And he states it in very simple words and in simple terms. I have my beliefs and I have my country. And if that's what's needed to keep doing and keep believing in what I believe in, so be it. And there was never a question. For Navalny, if you ask anyone around his team, across his team, they would be absolutely clear that he would get back anyway. The only question for me was clear back then, when he was returning back to Russia, that there was no way that would keep him out of coming home. The only question was maybe he could stay a little longer. He still needed to get some health, to get some treatment, to get back in shape, and probably not in January. Why in January? Maybe in April. Why in April? Maybe in June. This kind of discussion I can imagine, but not the final sort of question about him returning back home. what would Navalny do if he knew in advance that Putin would start the war, start his invasion, which would change everything, including his chances to survive in jail? I think my answer would be still that he would still come back. Again, sooner or later. For me, that Navalny that we know would never stay away. Anyway, he would come back, even in these particularly dangerous circumstances, which he probably didn't realize back then, because again, before the war, it was a different reality, and it was hard to foresee what to expect and to what scale of terror Putin and his system can actually reach.
You knew him personally, didn't you?
Of course I did, as many other journalists. And yes, of course I did. I interviewed him more than once. And there was a very funny moment. It was December 2016, I think. And we, with Vera Krichevska, we made a film about Boris Nemtsov, which later was developed in a book. But we made a film. It was a premiere of the film, and Navalny is also in it. He talks about Nemtsov, and he and Yulia, his wife, they came to the premiere, and it happened. It just was a coincidence that it was my birthday. So after the film, we all went to a bar and spent time drinking beer and talking and I don't know, congratulating me with the premiere of the film and also with my birthday. But that was a very, very nice moment, among many others.
While Navalny was in prison, you kept in touch by writing letters to each other. Can you tell us about what you discussed and how he was?
I was not his primary confidant. I'm positive about that. But I did exchange letters with him after I learned that he read my book about Boris Nemtsov and Russian political history, the book in which he also is very present, because I interviewed him more than once for this book in particular, and there are chapters about him in this book. So he's one of the characters, one of the main characters, because it's not just about Boris Nemtsov, it's also about Russian political history starting from late 80s until Nemtsov was murdered in 2015. The book came out after he was already in jail, after the war started. But he read it in his prison cell and he liked it, which I learned from his press secretary, Kira Yarmish, but with some reservations. And in particular, he thought that the way my portrait, how I describe Yeltsin, I do it in a more favorable way that he would expect. So that what he was arguing about that. So I responded in a letter trying to explain what I meant and why I describe him in this way and not other. So basically we were arguing about that. He also, because he became probably was before, but he specifically became a very avid books reader in jail. He asked me a favor to suggest something to read about the 90s, because half of the book is about the 90s. And I went through so many archive materials and books and memoirs and everything while I was writing books. So he writes to me, like, one of the best parts of your book is the bibliography. But being honest, it will be hard for me to read just every single item. So what would you specifically recommend? And I came out with a list of six books, among them David Hoffman's Oligarchs, which he read, and he later shared his emotions about that publicly, about David Hoffman's book, about my book as well, but whatever. So that's also, I think, quite interesting. But what is also important to know about Navalny in personal exchange is that it's the same Navalny we know publicly. There is no difference at all, just none. We were discussing Yeltsin in the 90s, and later he came out with, again, public statements about the 90s and what the responsibilities of the elites of the 90s, with the exact same words he used while writing to me. And what is also important and what is also so touching is that he is very interested in life. And he was asking how, so you now reside in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. I have been there once and for just a short trip. I don't know much, but I heard it's a great country. So tell me more about how much herring did you eat? Do you bike? What's going on? And I shared him some stories about just our life here, how we cope with this new reality and new life in exile, and how our kid is at school and its new school and language and barriers and differences and everything like that. And he was very interested in that. And he specifically thanked me for sharing these little details of our lives, because that's information about life in general in which he was so interested about.
What were the major reactions from his supporters to his death?
I think that his death put to shock not only his supporters, but also many others who didn't even see themselves as his supporters before. Well, I, as an independent journalist, as a Russian citizen, as a Russian, I was supporter of Navalny. I would vote for him if I would be able to. I was never skeptical of his work. I was always admiring what he did. So for me, it was a personal loss and personal grief since then, and for so many others. But again, I think this crowd is much larger than just Navalny, his base, his team, and those who knew him personally. That's a much larger crowd, which is in grief and in shock after what happened, after learning that he was murdered in his cell. And that's, yes, the emotion is, it's very hard to describe this kind of personal sorrow that people now go through. It's really, people just can't stop crying. It's been already a few days, but they still cry.
People are now calling Navalny a martyr to the cause of the anti-Putin opposition. Do you think that he poses a greater threat to the Kremlin dead than he did while he was alive?
I have to say that sounds like a weird kind of question to me. No, Navalny alive by default is a greater danger than after he's dead. That's why he's dead. But we already know, we already learned that Navalny was bigger than himself. His family made him who he was, and specifically his wife, Yulia Navalny. And those who know them both personally very well, they know, they now share this, that he was largely shaped as a personality by his wife. We always knew that she supported him fully and shared. We knew about her resolve and about her courage. She already went once through his own, basically death, almost death. In 2020, we saw how it happened. We saw how she was dealing with that. We knew that. So we know her strength already. But now she announced that she's stepping into his shoes and taking up his flag and carrying on. When I personally heard that, I felt relieved. It suddenly, that very moment, became easier to breathe for me, and I know not that for millions of other Russians as well. And of course, Navalny represented hope. He represented hope for this new, this post-Putin, civilized, normal, peaceful Russia, peaceful, civilized, normal, happy future. This beautiful Russia of the future, as he called it. And millions of people believed in that. And that hope has died. But now, with Yulia Navalny stepping into his shoes and calling to everyone not to give up, but to keep up believing and getting there to this future, I assume, I understand that many Russians now have this hope back again. And this is, I think, very important. It remains to be seen, of course, what the nearest future will, how it will shape the reality and who is Yulia Navalny as a political leader. We don't know that. But we already see that this light of hope is not dead. And there is still this belief in Navalny after he's dead, but still in his name and in his cause, and with the help of his family and his wife, and hopefully every single one of us, it will make this future happen.
That's all for this episode. Be sure to follow the Moscow Times on our social media and join us next week on Russia on the Record to stay informed about the latest news from Russia.